am back with Halley Sutton this week. So I know everybody is as excited as I am. We had a couple of topics. One, we are going to get into what I'm calling gateway thrillers, kind of like thrillers that are good for like your friends who are like, I've never read a thriller, but I'm interested. What should I read? So maybe not something that's going to like terrify them and keep them up all night, and maybe like not the dark thrillers that you read sometimes. So I thought that would be a fun topic, and I'm excited to see what you picked.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk about this with you, and I can't wait to see what you picked too. This was such an interesting topic that you proposed, and I was thinking about it and trying to think about like where were my gateway thrillers,
Yeah.
And it also made me think, I had a professor in grad school who would say, and I believe he was paraphrasing some very famous like American man of letters who I am forgetting who it is. So somebody I'm sure could shout out and say, but like that all novels on some level are a crime novel, are mysteries, that there's always, even if the crime is small or domestic, if it's not, it doesn't have to be illegal, but like a transgression, like at its heart, that's sort of what we read almost all novels for. And certainly I think that's true about mysteries. Like I was thinking about, for example, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, which is by no means a mystery novel, right? But it has all these little mysteries. Yeah, it has all these little mysteries threaded through it that you're reading for. You're trying to understand, like, why has she chosen the narrator to be the person to tell her story to? What was her actual relationship to all these men? Who was the love of her life? And you pick up those clues, and that's one of the things that keeps you moving forward as you read. And I think that all books, I really do think it's true that all really good novels, almost all, I mean, maybe there's some, I think there are those novels who, I say all, immediately undercut myself. Never mind, not true. But like those novels that resist the like traditional narrative arc may not be as true or really experimental. But like most novels have little mysteries that they're seeding that the reader is trying to get to, even if they're not a mystery in the sense of there's been a crime or there's a dead body. It's just, so I was thinking about that in our framing too, of like gateway thrillers and like where can people come into the genre. So I don't know, I just wanted to throw that out at top.
Yes. So when I sent you this topic idea, you kind of said that back. Like you mentioned how like all novels have mystery in them, and I was like, you're right, because the thing that keeps in like most stories, the thing that keeps the reader like turning the page is there's like something where they're like, I don't have the answer to this yet, or I don't know how this is going to play out, like that kind of a feeling. And so when you said that in your email, I was like, that's actually such a really good point. And it's kind of like thrillers just like ratchet that up even higher. But then we went and saw Challengers. I don't know if you've seen Challengers yet.
Okay, so this podcast might just turn into us talking about Challengers. Because I saw it last week and I'm obsessed with it. Yeah.
So did we. So we saw Challengers right after you and I talked about that, and you mentioned like all good stories have mysteries in them. And I'm gonna like I don't want to spoil it at all for anyone who hasn't seen it. So what I'll say is like I was seeing all these TikToks before we went and saw it, and they were like, the story structure is so crazy, like it's unlike anything I've seen. And people were comparing it to they're like, the last time I saw something like this was Slumdog Millionaire is what they were comparing it to.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I could see that. And then we saw the movie, and I was like, okay, I see where people are getting that. But I think what I really enjoyed about it is it's kind of paced and told like a thriller, where you start at present day, and then you're getting these little glimpses from like 13 years ago up to present to explain why everything is so intense in the present. And they just do it so well. So it's like every time you're going into the past, they're kind of answering a mystery that gets brought up in the present. And I was like, this is a perfect example of what Halley was saying. But what I also said to Tyler after we left it, I was like, now I see why like people I'm not trying to say this in a pompous way, people who like just watch movies and don't read as many books,
Mm-hmm.
I see why they're like, I've never seen a structure like this since Slumdog Millionaire, where
Right.
like I was telling Tyler, I was like, this is the structure of some of my favorite books, is like
Mm-hmm.
figuring stuff out this way. So it really is like, it's not a thriller, but it
No.
feels like one, and it's just a great movie.
Totally. It is thrilling, but it's not a thriller. Yeah,
Yes.
totally agree.
Yeah.
And it's yeah, and I'm with you. The structure is very book-like in that way. Like it's a like actually a
Mm-hmm.
very like I wouldn't say traditional, but like a fairly common device to have kind of like a
Yes.
current timeline and a past timeline, and the way you interweave them would be almost exactly the way that Challengers does it, where it's like
Yeah.
you have these snippets of the current timeline moving forward, and then each one moves back. And I also loved about this, I loved that movie. I like on so many
Oh, me
levels.
too.
I loved it. I
Yeah.
didn't like, it's not that I didn't thought it was a perfect movie, but like I came out of it just like
No.
exhilarated, and I was like, I want to see it
Yes.
again, you know, like, and I want to
Yes.
be like, I've never played tennis in my life, but somebody get me a racket, you know? Um,
Yes.
but like, I also love that the structure of it is, in some ways mimicking the tennis match that we're following. That's kind of this back and
Yes.
forth call and response. I just thought it was a really like smart and well put together movie, and just like high energy and
So high
sexy
energy.
and horny, and like I was so into it. It made me
Bisexual.
remember,
It was
yeah,
so
bisexual
bisexual.
for days. Like it was so great. And then um it made me, you know, I grew up playing sports, and I thought that they did a
Mhm.
really good job of kind of capturing that feeling of like
Mhm.
power that you have when you're like at the top of your game, and your body is
Yes.
really like bending to what your mind is asking it to do, that like those two are really in
Mhm.
sync. And that is like, I was trying to remember the last time I saw that feeling captured on screen, and it made me want to capture it in a book. And like, yeah, I
Ooh,
don't know, I
yeah.
loved it.
Yes. Yeah, I was obsessed with it. Again, trying to keep it as spoiler free as possible. The
Yep.
score is amazing. The score is part of what makes you like think that you could win a tennis match.
Yeah, totally,
Like you're like,
totally,
I could totally play tennis.
totally. It was the
Um
same feeling as which I know you just saw too, Monkey Man, where it was like I could like kick
oh,
through walls after that score, where I was just like,
yes.
oh, like
My gosh. I know. I was just about to bring that up because I saw we saw Monkey Man, and then the next week we saw Challengers, and I was like, this like I am kicking off the summer of movies like on a high. So
you really
hopefully like
are.
Mad Max Furiosa is still as good
uh,
as I'm thinking it's gonna be. I'm sure it will, but
I hope so too. I'm
just
really
two great
excited
ones
for
in a
that one.
row.
Yes, totally,
Yeah.
totally. And
Yeah.
both like
Challengers is
very,
very, very cool.
yeah, and both very I mean they're very different films, but both like that kind of
Yes.
like energetic feel. Like you come out of it feeling kind of
Hmm.
like amped up, you know, which I love.
Yeah.
Which can
Totally.
also be the
Very
experience of
much.
reading
Yeah.
a thriller, to bring us back to gateway
It
thrillers.
it really is. Like,
Yeah.
to talk about, because I think what Monkey Man did really well with its pacing as well, because like I always
Mm.
sit in the back row of the movie theaters, and we tend to go during the weekdays, and so mostly so that I can take notes the whole time
Oh, I
on
love that.
everything that I'm loving. And so Monkey Man, what they do so well is like, especially if you haven't like seen the whole preview or the whole trailer
Mhm.
recently, at the beginning you have so many questions, and so like that's what I couldn't stop writing, was like how many questions they like bring up in the first like 15
Mhm.
minutes. Like you don't know what he's doing, but you have all of these like, oh, why did he do that, why does he want to work here, like you have
Mhm.
all of these great questions, so you're so hooked even when you don't totally know like the direction it's going in. And that's what it was, that even reminded me of like thriller, which it is an action thriller, but like thriller mystery pacing, because
Mhm.
like you're just kind of like thrown into the world in the middle of the action, and you're just like finding out more information as it goes on. It was so good.
Yeah, I really liked that movie too, and I thought it was
Mm-hmm.
like I loved. I thought. I mean, Dev Patel, I think, is great. I've been like a fan of his since the Skins days, which I don't know if you ever watched
Yeah.
Skins, but like that
that,
was,
I
uh,
yeah,
it.
like I didn't, but it's like the OG Euphoria, right, kind of.
Yes, yes. OG
Yeah.
Euphoria, British show. My friends and I got obsessed with it in college, and we would just like watch like 8 hours
Yeah.
at a time of just like the most insane situations teenagers could ever get themselves in. But we were like, it's London. We don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it happens, you know? And he
Right.
was on that as a kid, and it was great. But like I thought he was great, and I thought that for his first feature, I mean that was the movie he directed, wrote, starred in, everything. It had such like an interesting, cool vision. Like I thought it
Yes.
was great. Yeah.
Yes. That was what that makes it even more endearing, is like I was
Mm-hmm.
obsessed with the fact that like this was his baby. I don't know if you like saw that like it almost didn't get to go to theaters, like it was just going
Oh
to go straight
wow.
to Netflix. And because there was some they started filming it and then COVID happened. And so
Mm.
then they were trying to keep the filming up, and basically got to a point where like they didn't have the funding to take it all the ways to theaters, something like
Mm-hmm.
that. And
Mm-hmm.
Jordan Peele saw a cut of the movie and he came on as a producer. He was like, people have to
Amazing.
see this in theaters. So Monkey Paw Productions picked it up, and Jordan Peele was even like, I mean, Monkey Paw, Monkey Man, like I had to.
Right, totally, totally. And God, I love Jordan Peele
Yeah.
too. Like such a visionary. And like Get Out is
Yeah.
like one of the best thriller films I would say of like the last, I don't know how many
Fantastic.
decades. Like it was so good.
So good. Also, randomly, I can't help myself but pointing out that we talked about Slumdog Millionaire in relation to Challengers, which is Dev Patel. And then in talking about Monkey Man, we talked about OG Euphoria, which
Yes.
is Zendaya. So we just had all of
Oh
the connections
yeah.
going on.
Totally, like a little like Ouroboros. Yeah, for sure.
Yes. Yeah, we're just matching all the connections. But yeah, if people haven't seen those movies, you guys need to go see them. I don't
So
know if Monkey
good.
Man is still in theaters, but they're definitely both worth seeing in theaters if you can.
Yes. Yes, I
Yeah.
agree. I felt like it was both of those where I was happy to have like the big screen experience
Yeah.
with too. And I thought that was part of the feeling of like feeling so like amped watching it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally. Yep. Well, now that we've shared all our movie recommendations, which I
And so
love.
okay. So let's
Yeah.
so let's get into gateway thrillers.
Yeah.
So I loved what you said. I'm wondering if you could say a little more too about like
Hmm.
what do you consider like a gateway thriller? Like what's like your
Yeah.
criteria? Or I don't know that there has to be I don't know. I'm just curious to hear more.
No, it's worth talking about for sure, especially at the beginning of it. So, the interesting origin story of this actually hits on two other people who've been on the podcast. So, Steph Lauer, she
Oh yeah.
has friends who are in like just a fiction book club. And
Mm-hmm.
then she's also the head of Thrillers by the Book Club in her state, basically.
Right.
So for that one, she obviously can just like recommend thrillers and roll with it. But she has some friends who were like, we kind of want to try one. And so back when The Last Housewife had just come out, by Ashley Winstead, which I love, obviously.
Me
She
too.
did that one, but she did not know I mean, Ashley even pitched it as a pitch black thriller. Ashley told people to read the trigger warnings.
Yeah.
Um, but Steph hadn't read it yet. And so they picked that. And she said that even she had some friends that were like, this is cool that you like this author, but I don't know if I'm going to finish it. Like, I don't know if this is for me.
That is
So,
incredible.
yeah.
Knowing and
Yeah.
loving that book and being like, oh yeah, and like the title is so innocuous. Honestly, I resisted
Yes.
picking up that book a little bit for a few months
Uh-huh.
because of the title. I kind of thought it was going to be
Yeah.
something that it wasn't.
Yep.
Yeah, that book is dark as hell and like rock and
Yes.
roll, like dark. I can imagine
Just
somebody reading that as like an early thriller and being like, are they all like this?
exactly. Exactly. Like, oh, I guess I don't like thrillers at all. So she told me that story and I was like, that's like a very classic, like if you read thrillers, like you're gonna enjoy that story. It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
So when Elizabeth Keenan and Greg Wands, who are E.G. Scott, they were
Mm-hmm.
on before we hit record, I was just talking to Elizabeth a little bit and I told her that story. And she was like, that would be actually a really good topic if you did like gateway thrillers, like
Mm-hmm.
thrillers that like would apply for that situation where it's like, hey, here's a way to like get a little hit of like the thriller experience without like terrifying or traumatizing someone who's not used to it, kind of.
Totally,
So
totally.
that's where this all came from, was kind of that combo of them. And I just like wrote it. I was like, that's a really good idea. I'm going to write it
Mm-hmm.
down as an idea. And then now we're talking about it. So I think kind of the criteria is like, you still get the thriller pacing. Like even when I
Mm-hmm.
was looking through them, I was like, well, there's still murder in, I think, all of these that I picked. So I was like, I guess that's dark, but it's like there is such a way for it to like not be gory
Yeah.
or not be like heavily focused on the death, and
Mm-hmm.
that it's kind of just like the fun pacing things of a
Mm-hmm.
thriller. So that was how I approached it.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, I kind of thought about this and when I was thinking about it, which I thought was such a great prompt. And that kind of dovetails with what I was thinking. I kind of went back through my Goodreads and my own like personal reading history and was like, well, where did I enter the thriller genre? And I think I probably even when I entered the thriller genre had like a darker sensibility, because one of the ones that I was looking at was like, oh, I read a lot of Stephen King as a kid. And like
Oh
that is
yeah.
can be pretty dark, but that was kind of like partially where I entered the thriller genre was him. And then I have a few others. But then I
Mhm.
was also thinking about it and thinking of like back to kind of what we were talking about the way that there's mysteries in every book. A lot of the books I was thinking of were like maybe almost genre crossover, like even lit fic
Mhm.
crossover. Like I think of literary fiction as a genre, with some books that have like more of a thriller bent sensibility plot engine, but also still are kind of like a little more literary, and like if like somebody's in a book club and they're thinking about for that. And then I was also thinking
Yeah.
about what are ones that are just kind of fun to read, that you don't close the
Yeah.
book and think like I again, I cannot say enough good things about The Last Housewife. I loved that book.
Mhm.
I like was so in awe of how Ashley Winstead did what she did with that book, and I think I like wrote
Yeah.
her a note immediately afterwards being like, I love how dark you went with that. Incredible. Like, so glad your editor didn't make you like sand off the edges. Like, I thought it was great.
Yes.
Um, but you close that book and you're not like, humanity's good and like what a cheerful day I'm having, you know? So I was trying to think of
You
books
don't
where
really
I
want
was
to talk
like,
to any men after you read it.
right. Exactly. You're like, the next motherfucker, excuse me, who crosses my path
Yeah.
is gonna get it, you know? Um, so I was trying to think of books that like that wasn't necessarily the feeling when you had
Yes.
it, or that maybe like the experience of reading it, even if it covered dark things like murder, was kind of overall a more upbeat one
Mhm.
without necessarily
Yep.
going full cozy. I'll be honest, I don't read a lot of cozies, so I don't feel like I can necessarily speak to
Me
some
neither.
recommendations there.
Yeah. I can't either. So
Yeah.
we're not full cozy in any of these.
No, no. Except for like
Yeah.
this is a weird thing, but I would almost tag some of Rachel Harrison's horror books as like cozy horror. Like they're definitely horror and dark,
Oh.
but they also make you feel good, like Cackle, I think, honestly.
Yeah.
So,
That's cool.
yeah.
That's cool. That's a fun one.
Yeah, it is a fun
Well,
one.
I can kick us off
Yeah, let's do it.
if you want.
Yeah.
So, one of the first ones that came to mind, and honestly, I would say probably all of hers are really good. Gateway was All the Missing Girls by Megan Miranda, which is
Oh
like
yeah.
2016.
Hmm.
But I think that's probably why she has very wide appeal, and that's why you probably see her stuff a lot of places, is they are thrillers, but they're like very accessible
Hmm.
for the most part. So this one is about Nicolette Farrell, who she left her hometown like 10 years ago after her best friend Corinne disappeared. Um, but she has to go back to take care of her father, and she gets sucked into some drama again that basically digs up her best friend Corinne's case, who went missing a decade ago. So back then, the investigation was focused on Nick, on her brother Daniel, and her boyfriend Tyler, and Corinne's boyfriend Jackson.
Hmm.
And since then, she's the only one who left the town. Everyone else is still there. Um, but now Tyler, her boyfriend from a decade ago, is dating someone named Annalise, who was their neighbor.
Mm.
Um, and within days of Nicolette returning home, Annalise goes missing. The
Mm.
fun part about this one is it's told backwards. So it's told from
Oh,
day
cool.
15 to day 1. So from the time Annalise goes missing, Nick is like working to unravel what happened, but you're starting basically 15 days out from her missing and working your way back up to the day that she went missing. So actually kind of similar to the Challengers
Mm-hmm.
um kind of, what is the word I'm looking for? Just the different time frame. Like this is kind of like past and present, but like going
Mm-hmm.
backwards. And it's just I remember loving it. Like I read this one years ago, but it like always sticks in my mind for like every now and then there's a topic that comes up and I'm like this one because it was just so creative and it has like the fun small town dynamics that's kind of a fun trope and
Mm-hmm.
it's not like overly focused on murder, just two missing women. So, and I
That's
love Megan
great.
Miranda.
Totally. She's so great. And like you said, lots of
Yeah.
like crossover appeal too, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Good
really
one.
fun. It's a, like
Mm-hmm.
I don't reread books,
Mm-hmm.
but it's one that like sometimes I'm like I kind of want to reread it.
Totally. Totally. Do you not reread books ever?
I never have.
Nice. Just
Yeah.
keep moving
I
forward.
just
I
always
like
have
it.
so many more to read.
I know, truly, seriously, as my shelves behind me can attest, like
Right.
same, hard same. That's a great one, and I love that structure. I think that that's so cool to like, and it kind of upends the like traditional structure of a crime novel, and I think that's so interesting. But it gets at
Yeah.
like what we're looking for, which is like what happened here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's really
um,
good.
that's great. So one of the ones that I was thinking of was one of my gateway. They're more mysteries than thrillers, but they definitely have thriller elements. Were the Stephanie Plum books by Janet Ivanovich. Like I started reading those when I was maybe in I don't know, eighth grade or something. And so the first one is called One for the Money. And I don't know how many she's up to now at this point, like 26, 27. Like there she's
Oh
and
my
she just
goodness.
sold three more. And they made a movie of it with Katherine Heigl and everything. But like those books are they almost have like a rom-com sensibility. Like there's kind of this
Mm.
ongoing will she won't she thing with Stephanie and at least two men. I stopped reading them maybe at like book 12 or 13 and I like loved them, but then
Mhm.
kind of was like, all right, we're just kind of rehashing the same thing over and over. And I think I just kind of moved on. But so I don't know, maybe she's decided on Joe or Ranger or somebody else. But I what I think was so great about those as like a gateway thriller because there's a lot of action and intensity and suspense in there, but that they are kind of like rom-coms. It's like if Bridget Jones was the PI in a book. And so
Nice.
she's this young woman who's just gotten a divorce and needs money and she decides to become a bounty hunter and that's how she's going to earn her money is getting tracking down these people who have skipped out on their bail. And then of course is like woefully underprepared. She has a mentor and gets involved with a couple of different men who may or may not have shady, interesting past. And it's just populated with this
Mm.
full cast of really great characters. Like she has a grandmother who's just like 90 and horny the whole time. Is just aggressively horny like the whole all of the books and there's it's so funny like they're just I'm always envious of people who can write really funny books because that's hard to do and I
Mhm.
these are such good ones so like such a good entry point into the genre where it's both
Yeah.
kind of thrilling but also if that's not your jam there's like great family beats and just like
Mm.
funny and romantic and sexy they're great.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that reminds me. Did you ever watch Covert Affairs on USA
I did
with
not, but
Piper
I do know the
Perabo?
show. Yeah.
It reminds me of that. Like that was
Hmm.
like it was like a CIA, like it is a spy show, but it like the relationships outside of like the spy world were pretty heavily developed too. So it was kind of like a entry gateway spy thriller on TV, basically. So it's reminding me of
Love
that.
that.
But
Right. Like you're
I
not going
love
full
that.
Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. You're kind of starting like on the more,
Yes.
yeah, totally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. That sounds awesome. And I can't believe how coincidental it is the next one that I have. Because
Oh
when you were
no.
saying like the PI and the family beats and all of that. So I just posted about it today. We're recording on May 8th. But I read the second Billy Levine book recently.
Yes, so good.
So I wanted to talk about the first one, which is Death of a Dancing Queen. And so it's about, she's a PI as well. Billy Levine is kind of taking over her grandfather's PI firm. And her and family beat, her mom also has Alzheimer's, and she's having to kind of learn how to take care of her financially and her health. And so basically a rich kid named Tommy Russo offers her a bunch of money to find his girlfriend, and she's like, I mean, this seems kind of weird, but like I can't say no to money. And but then basically then the missing person case turns into a murder investigation, and her client is like the detective's number one suspect. All of that like keeps escalating, and somehow she's gets like embroiled in a gang war that's connected to this decades old disappearance of a cabaret dancer, with ties to an infamous Jewish mob and a skinhead group. So all of a sudden she is like in the middle of that, and in the midst of all of that, her hunky, according to the synopsis, ex-boyfriend with his own rap sheet is reappearing in her life, and she's regretting every decision that got her to this point with him. So even when you were saying like with yours, like the kind of shady guys that she's with, I was like, this is hilarious that I have this next one lined up. But I love these books. The second one comes out on May 14th. So anyone who's like really in a PI vibe, a noir vibe, you could read two of them by the time that this episode, or you could dive into two of them by the time this episode's coming out. So, and it's by Kimberly G. Giarratano. And I love her. She was on the podcast last year about Death of a Dancing Queen. She's going to be on again about this second one. So they're just like, her voice, she's funny while still having like mystery and very noir elements still happening. Totally. I just love being in her Billy Levine world.
Totally. I was lucky enough to get to read the first one, Death of a Dancing Queen, early because I got to blurb it, which is like one of the most fun parts of being a writer is when people like send you their books early and you're like, no, of course. I love that book. I'm so happy that Billy is back for a second book, hopefully a third, hopefully a long running series. And I totally agree. She does a really good job balancing a lot of elements in those series where it's like, it is funny at times, and then there's like lighthearted stuff in there. There's also really dark stuff in there, like both the crime elements and also there's an element of, like, I don't know that this is a spoiler to say, but like she has a family history of Alzheimer's, and kind of throughout the book she's kind of like, is this going to be a thing that's coming for me? Like, and so it's like these really like intense questions about things. And like, what does that mean to be a PI who like can't necessarily trust your brain function? And like, they're so good. They're so good. And so I'm so excited for the next one coming out next week. I can't wait.
Yes. I kept almost DMing you when I was reading it, but then I would be like, don't pull up Instagram and get distracted. Just keep reading. But this one has a lot of art theft in it. And so it reminded me of your topic that you brought up. I like kept thinking of you.
Yes.
So I think you'll really enjoy this one.
Even more excited to read the next one. I mean, I was always excited, but like now, that's great.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's fun.
Okay. So my next ones are, I kind of am grouping these two authors together, although they're very different, but I'll talk about both of them. Okay. Like, these are both authors that I read again when I was pretty young, like probably high school. And I don't think I was even thinking about genre of books at that point in the way that I do now. I was just thinking like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I like this story. I'm interested in this story, right? Um,
Yeah.
and so I read a lot of Elmore Leonard growing up, which I don't know. He is like, he died in, I want to say, 2012. He's considered like one of the great American prose stylists, but he wrote crime novels. He wrote Westerns for a while before that. He's crazy
Whoa.
adapted, like so many, like Quentin Tarantino, massively influenced by him. The movie Jackie
Oh,
Brown is an adaptation of one of his books. The TV show Justified was based on one of his books. The TV show,
wow.
or the movie Out of Sight with George Clooney and Jennifer Lopez is based on his book Out of Sight, which is truly like one of my favorite books in this world. Also his book
Huh.
Gold Coast, which is about this woman. Gold Coast is maybe my favorite Elmore Leonard book. And like, and I feel that way because it's a little underrated. Also, Get Shorty is another like classic of his. That both the John Travolta
Mm-hmm.
movie was made in the 90s, and then they remade it as a TV series a few years ago about a mafia man who like moves to Hollywood and gets involved in movie making.
Nice.
So Gold Coast is about a woman who marries a man in Florida who is kind of mob adjacent. Like I don't remember if he's like exactly a gangster or he just sort of has gangster ties. And anyway, she finds out like the sentence is one of my is one of my favorite first sentences in like all of crime fiction, which is like Karen DeCilia put some things together and realized that her husband was screwing his secretary at like the Gold Coast apartments, something like that. And it's just like it's so good. And so she finds out her husband's cheating on her, and she threatens like, I'm going to have an affair. And he basically is like, never. And he writes it into his will when that like if she gets involved with another man, she doesn't get any of my money even after I'm dead. Like, and so then of course early in the book he dies, and it's her kind of trying to like circumvent this will or like push against it in different ways. And it's like just such a good kind of like what Elmore Leonard does really well, that like the books get dark, but they always feel like a caper. You know what I mean? They don't feel
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there has been a turn in crime novels, crime movies often to kind of have this darkness and heaviness. And don't get me wrong, I love that. Like those are the waters I swim in. I was just thinking today, I was like, maybe the
Yeah.
next book I write will be lighter. And then I was like, probably not. Like that doesn't interest me. Probably not. But like in the 90s, even as things got dark, there was still this kind of like poppiness to like these like caper
Yeah.
feelings. So that's kind of which I actually think it was published before the 90s, but it has this kind of different feel to it that maybe for somebody who isn't looking for books that feel super heavy or dark, like a book
Mm-hmm.
I love, but I think it's like a pretty dark thriller would be like Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn.
Yeah.
Like that's not one that that's not a gateway thriller I would recommend to anybody, but these kind of are. These
No.
tend to be a little bit more like bank robbers or, things that are
Yeah.
like crime, but it's not maybe so heavy and
Heavy.
personal. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he's a different writer, but I would put him kind of in a similar category for a gateway thriller was I
Mm-hmm.
used to love the Carl Hiassen books. Did you ever read any of his books? He
No.
is a Florida writer, and he just like mercilessly mocks Disneyland and Disney World the whole time. Like he just like he can't say Disney because like he doesn't want to get sued, so he'll just be like the
Right.
rat's house. Like and so he has these series of books that are often interconnected that are very
Ooh.
Florida Man. Before we were calling Florida Man a thing, these books were out
Yes.
there. And so a lot of those have been made into movies. The pretty terrible movie Striptease with Demi Moore was based on one of his books. I think I have to imagine the
Oh,
book is
okay.
better. But again, they are kind of these caper stories that revolve around maybe like stealing $1 million boa constrictor out of the Everglades and like or like
Oh.
there's one I remember reading where husband and wife are on a yacht, and in the first chapter the husband throws the wife off the yacht and she survives and like makes it her life mission to like take him down. So they tend to be kind of
Nice.
more again like kind of capery, not that there's not dark
Yeah.
elements, but they have this kind of fun light feeling to them. They are like perfect beach reads, like really truly, and like again, very Florida man, just like full of insane characters in there. And like
Yeah.
I'm honestly, I'm like talking myself into going and rereading a Carl Hiassen book right now.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that vibe, and both of those authors that you just mentioned, to bring it back to movies, it's making me think of The Fall Guy, which I have not
Hmm.
seen yet, but I'm very excited
Me
because I'm
too.
hearing very similar reviews that like it's actually still very high octane and like very actiony and has the feeling of a thriller, and then is also totally a rom-com at the exact same time.
Totally.
So I think that one, like, that's one that I'm like excited to go see because yeah, like you're still gonna have the thrills and like the pacing of a thrill, but
Hmm.
there's like some funny jokes. Like on the Elmore book I just pulled up, it was saying it's told with a sardonic voice, which is like
Yes.
you had me at sardonic
Ah,
basically. So I
totally.
think I'm hearing that the movie is a little bit like that, and it is just like fun having those books that are like still just going to be kind of fun, but there's also some thrilling stuff happening.
Totally, totally. That's like I think a pretty good comp, especially for the Carl Hiassen ones, where it's like the vibe. I
Hmm.
haven't seen Fallout Guy either, and I really want to because it does look really
Hmm.
fun and it's getting good reviews. And it seems like it doesn't
Yeah,
take itself too seriously, which is
I
also how
think
I feel
so.
about the
Yeah.
Carl Hiassen books. They're really fun reads that also are
Yeah.
not particularly heavy, even as they're like social
Hmm.
satires at times.
Yeah. Sometimes you just don't need heavy.
True.
Like we said, like there
Yeah.
are times when I love it, and then there are times where you're like, I can't. I started reading Bright Young Women at a time that was like the wrong time for me.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Yeah.
I know this is good, but like it's not for me right now. And then when I did read it later, it was like better timing, but sometimes it's just
Totally.
not the right time.
100%. I that makes me like are you I'm like a mood reader in the same way where it's like I
Hmm.
need the this is like the most 2024 thing I've said today, I guess. The vibes have to be right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It has to kind of match what you're feeling in this
Yes.
moment, you know?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in that case, mine is like I know that like when I'm PMSing, I just can't read anything too depressing that week because
Yep.
it just gets worse. And I tried to start reading it on that kind of a week and I was like,
Yeah.
this just makes me want to cry.
Totally. Totally.
So yeah.
I'm the same. I actually go like very light during those moments, or I'll be like,
Yep.
let's shut every curtain in the house and put on like Hello Darkness, my old friend, and just like watch the darkest thing. You know what I mean? Like either like lean
Yes.
all the way into it or like, nope, let's throw something
Yeah.
fun in the mix.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. That's me for sure.
Yeah.
Um, well, my next one is I feel like it's a good gateway for a couple different reasons, but it is All Good People Here by Ashley Flowers.
Ooh, yeah.
Anyone who's a crime junkie fan, this is she's the host of a really, really popular true crime podcast. And she wrote her first novel. I can't remember if she wrote anything else like nonfiction, but she wrote her first fiction novel in 2022. And it takes place in a really small town. Basically, everyone in Wakarusa, Indiana, remembers the case of January Jacobs, who was found dead in a ditch hours after her family awoke to find her gone. So Margot Davies, the narrator, was 6 at the time. She was the same age as January, and they were next door neighbors.
Mm.
So now we're 20 years into the future from that. And Margot has become like a journalist in the city in Indianapolis. And but she's always like she's lived her whole life basically kind of freaked out that like it could have been her since they were like
Mm-hmm.
neighbors and the same age, and the killer was never caught. So it's just kind of like that person's just like always been out there and freaking her out. So she gets pulled back to her small town, clearly one of my favorite tropes, to take care of her sick uncle. And basically all the memories are rushing back to her. And then a girl from the next town over who's 5 years old goes missing, like in the present timeline. And so now Margot's like, I am going to figure out how these two cases are connected. Um, And so she's kind of revisiting all of the people from her memories of her childhood, like trying to put together what she remembered as a child with what's happening at present. And I will just say that you will not expect the ending at all. So I was also about to say something else, and I realized that would give the ending away. So I'm not going to
Mm.
say that reason that it's a good entry, but it's kind of like you can feel how her experience as a true crime podcaster like
Mm-hmm.
helped shape her creating a character that's like trying to investigate something from a journalistic perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And it's obviously the murder of her friend from like 20 years ago is like a big part of it, but you're not totally fixated on the murder the whole time. So it is kind of more her like sifting through her memories and kind of like that whole past and present colliding. And the ending is just crazy. The ending is I know it's one where some people either love or hate it, I guess. But I think it's like also kind of a good ending to experience as a thriller reader. Like I think you'll
Mm.
enjoy the experience of it. So I think it would be a good option.
Ooh, that is like such a cryptically intriguing
I
blurb for
know.
that book. Like, yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds great. It also makes me think of, okay, so full disclosure, I haven't read that book yet. I'm well aware of it. I think
Hmm.
it's been a big hit in the last couple of months. It makes me think of like, I feel like something that people could, like another reason it could be a good gateway thriller. I feel like a thing that people could relate to is, especially if you grew up in a small town, which I did,
Hmm.
there's always like one crime that you all knew about,
Mm,
or like a handful of crimes. You know what I mean? Like, and that's what it
yeah.
sounds like. It's kind of
Hmm.
the impetus for the book is this like the infamous crime that's never been solved. Like, I have one of those in my hometown. There
Yeah.
was a young girl who was like maybe 10 years older than me, but she disappeared when she was 17 walking home from the mall. And like that didn't happen
Oh,
very
wow.
frequently. And like it's never been solved. People have wondered if
Hmm.
Robert Durst was involved because of some weird timing. And he had a house um, up by where I grew up. And so, you know, the Jinx season 3, maybe, but like it's that sort of thing that like replicating that experience that I think a lot of people have, even if you're not thriller readers, of being like, there was like one crime that happened in my hometown that like we all knew about, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah, and it's fun coming at it from like the journalist perspective. Sometimes
Yeah.
you're in like the police perspective or whatever,
Hmm.
so that part's kind of fun following it from that perspective.
Totally. Totally. You're right. Like there's such a difference between like the procedural and then somebody else who's investigating like
Mhm.
from a different side. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it kind of like explores our personal biases and stuff and
Hmm.
all of that since like that's a part of it since she knows the townspeople, so it's
Totally.
really good. It was very
Yeah.
memorable.
That's kind of similar to my next recommendation in
Ooh.
certain ways, which is the book I Have Some Questions for You by Rebecca Mackay that came out in
Mm.
2023. And it's
Yeah.
definitely more literary with a serving of thriller, but it's kind of a dual timeline um, of this woman went to this really famous boarding school, and one of the girls who she was like friends with but not best friends with was
Mhm.
murdered while they were students there, and it's never been solved. Or I'm sorry, that's not true. Murdered while they were students there, and there's a someone's in jail for the crime who was connected to the school,
Cool.
but as
Mhm.
an adult she comes back there to teach, and she's kind of in the midst of like a big life change with her marriage and different things. And she starts to wonder, like one of her students proposes like, oh, I want to do a podcast about this true crime. Can I interview you about it? And as they get into it, she starts to wonder if the wrong man is in jail, and starts to kind of pick
Ooh.
apart her own memories. And so it's this kind of meditation on like, can we trust our memories? How much did we actually
Mm.
see? You know, what good is your memory 20 years later? And
Right.
it's got kind of tinges of dark academia and 1990s boarding
Ooh.
school, while also being very like, you know, upmarket literary. And so I think I think for somebody who is looking for an entry point into the thriller genre, but like likes book club fiction or more literary fiction, I think that's a great one. And I found the ending wildly satisfying, but I have my friend Wendy Hurd, who is a writer as well of
Yeah.
many thrillers, like texted me after she finished it and was like, I yeeted this book across the room. Like, that's how it ended. And I was like, but that's the beauty of it. Like, and again,
Oh,
I don't want to give anything away, but like, she definitely plays with all of the thriller tropes, but then consciously rejects some in favor of others. It's a great book. It's long, but it's really good.
yeah. I remember my dogs are giving their opinions as well.
Yeah, they have
Um,
some gateway
I
thrillers they'd like to mention.
they do. I remember seeing that book everywhere. Like it was all over people's timelines, and it was one I just
Mhm.
haven't gotten to. But now you've got me convinced with that ending hook. Like
Yeah,
I'm
I for
really
sure want
intrigued.
you to read it and tell me what you think about the ending, because whether we get to that conversation today or another day, I still really want to have a conversation with you about like what makes a satisfying ending in the thriller genre, because
Yes,
I don't know. I think it's a really interesting question. Do we always have to answer every
I know.
question? And at what point,
Hmm.
what like how is that done satisfyingly, and then when is it unsatisfying? Because I think that those are
Yeah,
interesting questions too.
yeah. No, it really is. And I know it's so subjective. That was like you're saying, like Wendy Hurd had a totally different reaction than you did. People can feel so differently about endings. I think it
Mm-hmm.
is, which is like so interesting. And mine, I've kind of always said that, like, to me, I want it to feel, which would still end up being subjective, but I want it to like feel like the ending was inevitable. So I want
Mm-hmm.
it to kind of feel like, given everything that the author told me up to the ending, this could be expected. And so I think that's why sometimes with some endings that are like a little bit ambiguous,
Yeah.
um I'm like, I still kind of feel like I know where the author was pushing
Mm-hmm.
me, or why there's like a deeper meaning for the ending being kind of ambiguous. That's like kind of where I end up falling.
Totally, totally. I hear that. And I feel very similarly. I want that same feel, like that really we
Hmm.
couldn't have gotten to any other place by the end of the book.
Yeah.
But I also fall on a spectrum of I'm okay with not every question being answered as long as it doesn't feel like it's just because the author dropped the ball. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
and then I think that also pushes against, like, I think one of the pleasures and one of the reasons that people come to like thriller and crime genre is like it gives a version of a world in which answers are knowable, which is not true of every which is not true of most of life, right? Like
Yeah.
krillers. Crime novels, thrillers are very like logical, and they tend to be like, okay, I've set you a puzzle, and the reward is at the end. You will understand the puzzle, and like I agree with that. But I think that there are sometimes ways that you can. There's also a way I get annoyed by that and want to push on it of like, but that isn't always the experience of life, and sometimes it feels too neat to be able to just say like, oh, and we've gone to all these places, and now it's all just wrapped up with a bow. And so I think what Rebecca Mackay does in I have some questions for you, to me felt like the best of both worlds, that you come out of it and it's not that you don't have a good sense of what might have happened, but it's also not this perfect ending either. And I hope I didn't give anything. I don't think I gave anything away by saying that. It's just it like I thought it was a really well done example um of something like that where it's kind of both.
I think sometimes too, like with story, sometimes the most important thing is how the main character is transformed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes
Mm-hmm.
that can be where, like, it's okay if the external plot isn't completely tied up. If I feel like a satisfying feeling about like how the character changed, I think that
Totally.
sometimes works really well too.
Totally, which is like essentially what like a crime or a thriller novel is, which is like taking that
Yeah.
internal character change and using something external and like an external catalyst to
Yeah.
kind of also bring it back interior. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're so spot on with that.
Yeah. Well, we have lots of feelings about endings, and we may talk
Yes.
about it even more, but
Oh yeah.
I do love that. I do love that thought, and just like, and just how different you can feel per book. Like maybe on a
Mm-hmm.
certain book, you're like, oh, I really thought I wanted answers. And then on another one, you're okay with not having all of them.
Totally. I think that's true. And I think a lot of that has to do with like the author's craft, right? Like
Yeah.
of the way that they've constructed the story. Like even like what you just said, like, am I satisfied by the character's journey, even if I don't
Yeah.
know all of the pieces? Like, even if I couldn't tell you this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened in terms of like the
Mm-hmm.
crime itself, or like, oh, it's, so and so didn't go to jail. But, like I think that that's always an element of craft.
Yeah.
And I'm very impressed by authors who can pull that off, where they can find ways to make the book satisfying, even if it's not like, and then all the bad guys are in jail and we've just,
Yeah.
the world is restored.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Well, my next one has a very satisfying ending. I was really
Ooh.
hoping that I was gonna like have one be like, and for an ambiguous ending, but my last ones have pretty satisfying endings. But my next one for gateway thrillers is called The Lies I Tell by Julie Clark.
Mm-hmm.
I am a sucker for con thrillers, as anyone who listens knows. And this one is about two women and lots of aliases. So one has gone by Meg Williams, Maggie Littleton, and Melody Wild, just depending on the job that she needs to do. And she's a con artist who erases herself to become whoever you need her to be. Um, Nothing about her is real, and she slides along and tells you exactly what you need to hear. And by the time she's done, you've likely lost everything already.
Mm.
Then we have Kat Roberts, who has been waiting 10 years for the woman who upended her life to return. And now that she has, Kat is determined to be the one to expose her. But as these two women grow closer, Kat's long held assumptions begin to crumble, leaving Kat to wonder who Meg's true target is, which this does not give away much of the plot, which is good for this. But it's such a cat and mouse thriller. And it's
Mm-hmm.
another one where you're like torn because you switch between the point of views of both of these women, and you start to understand both of their motivations the further you get into the book, and you're like, who am I even pulling for? And I like love that kind of suspense. I think it's just like super fun.
Totally.
I can't remember if there's no murder. I think there may even not be. So it's like most of the suspense is coming from like, who am I even pulling for as the reader,
Mm-hmm.
and how are their like differing motivations going to clash?
I love that. I love that. And I
Mhm.
have that book, which I haven't read. And I actually think Julie Clark lives in my neighborhood, which is a weird thing to
Really?
say. But like, yes, I went to an event that she did with Ashley Winstead. And
Oh, nice.
Ashley and I went out to dinner afterwards, and she was talking to me, and she was like, "Oh, you should hang out with Julie. She's in your part of town." And like, I've legit like considered wandering the streets, just being like, Julie Clark, Julie, like,
That would be hilarious.
yeah. I don't know that she'd respond, but we'll see. But yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. I love
That's
those books
good.
too, where it's like, who am I even rooting for? Like, you start out thinking
Yeah.
you're going one place, and then you wind up being like, oh, these characters are so real in this way. I love that.
Hmm. It's very good. It's one of my favorites of all time.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, it just jumped up a
Yeah.
few notches on my TBR list.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really good. You'll have to text me if you read it.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Um, Okay, my next one is an art crime book that I can't remember if I
Ooh.
brought this up when we talked about art crime or not, with by a writer I'm obsessed with. And this book was nominated for an Edgar, but like funny enough, I don't even know if she considers herself a thriller or a crime writer. I think all of her books have elements of them in it, but that's I think what makes them a good entry point. But this book is called Fake Like Me by Barbara Borland, who is a writer I am absolutely obsessed with. And her book, The Force of Such Beauty, that came out I think in 2022, is like one of my all-time favorites, and like truly like loved that book. And like it was so funny because I read the description of that book online. Sorry, another chance to talk about The Force of Such Beauty, I guess. Here we go. I read the description of that book online and was kind of like, I don't know, it doesn't totally speak to me. It's kind of like the story of a woman who's essentially a Meghan Markle. Like she's not royalty herself, but she winds up married to the crown prince of a small country. But the book is so beautiful, so absorbing. Her writing is so good. Like just like one of my favorite books of all time. And I'm so glad I picked it up. And part of the reason I did is I think Amy Gentry posted about it on Instagram and was like, this book is great. And like, if Amy Gentry likes the book, I'm like, must read it. So I then went,
so cool.
Oh my God. Isn't it a cool cover? It's like a phenomenal. Cool. Yeah, it's great. It's so good. Yeah. And Fake Like Me is great too. And so that's the one that's right before The Force of Such Beauty. So that is the story of an artist. And I think she's never named in the book, actually, the main narrator, who kind of, what Barbara Borland kind of seems to be doing as a larger project is like exploring different experiences of womanhood using kind of thriller tropes. And so the experience of this book is kind of like feeling like you're never good enough, feeling insecure, feeling like you're not the smartest person in the room. So this woman is an artist, and she finally like makes a big sale at her gallery of these like, I think she's painting the vices, maybe. It's like 7 or 9 portraits or something. And in the first chapter, they all go up in this like terrible fire in her apartment building. So it's like, this was going to be the thing that made her. This was going to be the thing that like could sustain her life. And they just burn up. And so she winds up, she can't tell anyone that though, because then they'll cancel the sale and she won't get the money. So she winds up going to this famous, art collective. Like this art collective has this kind of like almost like summer camp that they've taken over where people go to create things. But it's been closed for the last so many years because the woman who was kind of the most famous part of the art collective killed herself. And so they just shut it down. And so she winds up getting to go there so that she can work on her art and kind of without anyone knowing, recreate all of these art pieces. And then she gets kind of sucked into like, well, why did this woman kill herself? And what was the story? Like this particular artist is for her kind of like North Star. Like she doesn't see a lot of female artists who are like who she wants to be, but this woman is. And so she starts to unravel like, who was this person? What led her to this? And gets to some truly like shocking, crazy places. And it's a thriller without it being like, it is what happened at the center of it, even a crime, but it is still a thriller. And it's very beautifully written, very lyrically written, and raises a lot of questions of like, what is art? Like just in general, and like what makes some art valuable. And it just like, I truly loved that book. Like, and I think that that's one that I would recommend to anybody, regardless of whether they were a thriller reader or literary fiction or whatever. Like it's got elements of a lot of things. There's a beautiful slow burn romance in it. Like it's so great.
Nice. You have me convinced I need to start reading some Barbara Borland.
Oh, you got to. They're so good. They're
I'm
so
not
good.
Gonna lie, I also just pulled up her author profile, and she has the same glasses as me.
Yes.
She has dark hair and bangs. Like, is it narcissistic that I want to read her books?
No, I don't think so. Like you guys both have a very cool look and aesthetic that's very similar in a lot of ways. And she's just like, truly somebody I'm like enchanted with as a writer.
Oh my gosh, I've got to read these. Yeah, I'm gonna add these to my list. Which is what happens every week.
I totally.
Which is good. More books is good. I'm fine with it. But yeah, that sounds really cool. It is, I think it is really interesting when books that are art talk about what art is, or like
Mm-hmm.
explore that as well.
Mm-hmm.
There was Sarah Ezrick
Yeah,
Zhang
yeah, yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
Yang. He
Yes.
did The Other Me, and that was
Mm-hmm.
like an artist who like walks into another timeline of her life, and then like kind of doesn't have all of the same art skills, but like it also is still in her because it's like inherent to her. And I thought
Totally.
that was one that I read that was like very cool in the way that it explored the artist experience basically.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Her stuff is really cool for sure.
I know I want to read her newest one. But I did not get it on NetGalley, but it is out
Mm.
now. So I need to like bump it up. But I got denied for it. And I was like, I am such a big fan of hers.
Yeah,
But that
you're like, come
happened.
on.
I know. I'm like, really, you want me to read this and talk about it? I promise.
Totally.
I still will when I read it though.
Yeah.
Because that one had her newest one's called When I'm Her. And it's
Yes.
like about friends whose friendship fractured, went separate ways, but one of them feels like her life was ruined because of the other friend,
Mm.
then like finds a way, or some program comes about where she's able to swap lives with that person and she feels entitled to that life. And then she gets in her life and is like, oh my God, there's a lot going on that I can't handle.
Totally.
So I'm like very intrigued by that, like as a concept. It sounds so interesting.
Totally. It sounds like a great concept. And I love that she does these kind of speculative thrillers a little bit where it's not
Yeah.
like fully like, a dystopia or a different reality, but like
Nope.
that there is this like magical ability to do this thing that you can't. And I love that.
It's like sci-fi light, kind of,
Exactly. Yeah.
mostly
Yeah.
thriller. Yeah.
Totally. We could also
Yeah.
call those like those books might be like gateway sci-fi books almost, you know?
Yes. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I'm like only a gateway sci-fi reader, so
Totally.
it fits. Yeah, now I kind of wish I had one of those on here, but I don't. But my next one was another one that I remembered. It's again, I read it years ago, but it just like sticks in my brain because of how fun it was to read. And it's more domestic suspense, which I feel like fits really well for gateway
Mm-hmm.
thrillers. It's
Totally.
called Never Have I Ever by Jocelyn Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
Um, oh, it's just it has so many of my favorite things in it. But basically, we have two characters. Our first one is Amy Way, and she's like very proud of her like simple life that she has created for herself in the suburbs. Um, and she and her best friend Charlotte run this book club that's like really popular in their neighborhood. She's super devoted to her husband and her 15-year-old stepdaughter, and she has a new baby boy. Um, so basically, her life is just going great. But since we're in a book, we know that's going to change. So, this sultry and magnetic new woman, Rue, joins the book club, basically, like moves into the neighborhood and joins the book club. And everyone just loves her, and she's just like drinking with everyone and kind of getting everyone tipsy and having some naughty, harmless fun, but they're also all kind of telling her their secrets. And so when Rue is alone with Amy one night, she tells her that if she doesn't give her what she asks for, what she thinks she deserves, she's going to make Amy pay for her sins
Ooh.
one way or another. And so we don't know what Amy did, but all of a sudden Amy is terrified. So clearly she did something. And so this is another one that turns into a cat and mouse. I'm pretty sure we're in both perspectives. I'm
Mm-hmm.
about 90% sure. I read it 5 years ago. But I'm pretty sure we're in both perspectives. So it's kind of funny that I have my two cat and mouse ones right at the end. But it was like sometimes domestic suspense is either a little bit too slow since it's so
Mm-hmm.
involved in emotion sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
or sometimes it feels like it's like the same plot in a lot of them. And this
Yeah.
one just felt like it kept switching. Like you thought you knew where it was headed, and then it was not where it was headed. And it was just kind of like all over the place and very unique, all over the place in a
Mhm.
good way. And it's also another one too where you're kind of torn. You're like, who am I pulling for? And like who is good and like what is
Mhm.
good in a broad sense. So I had a lot of fun reading this one.
Oh, that's great. That's a great recommendation. I know of that book, but I
Yeah.
also haven't read that book. I feel like every time I talk to you too, my TBR list just expands, which like
Yeah.
it was already
You like
enormous.
you have so many authors I've never heard of is like the other part too.
Totally, totally. And like I think I've heard of all the ones you've mentioned, but like it does remind me, I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That book I've been wanting to read it. I should go read it. So like that sounds great.
Oh, it's so
Yeah.
fun.
Okay. I gotta
I'm
check that one
chasing the
out.
high of that book still.
Yes. 5 years later. That's a good
Yeah,
sign.
it is.
Totally. Um okay, I have like a bunch of honorable mentions and different things that I could talk about. I mean,
Okay.
I think um I have one I kind of wanted to end on, but like, or not end on necessarily, but like one that was really like I wanted to hit, but also makes me think of another one that I want to mention is like, and I think these books are back in print, but I don't remember. Kelly Garrett's first books, the Hollywood Homicide books, are
Yes.
they are great. They are like, kind of similar to Billy Levine. It's a Black woman in Los Angeles who becomes kind of like a PI out of necessity. She might have a different job title, but that's essentially her function. Is she's like tracking
Mhm.
down, and it's very like Hollywood centric. Like she's kind of hobnobbing with
Yeah.
stars in different places, and they're really fun books that are somehow both like buoyant but also dark, without being heavy, and like I love all of Kelly
Yeah.
Garrett's writings, especially her later books too. I'm a big fan of, but these have this kind of like, it was really unique. It's a really unique space that I think the Hollywood Homicide books have landed in, and they were out of print for a while, but I think they might be back in print. Fingers crossed. I mean, and also like Missing White Woman is a great one that's just out, so
It was amazing.
yeah,
So good. Yeah, I
totally.
know you can at least read them on Kindle even if they aren't in
Yes.
print because I've been thinking about I've read all of her other one or
Hmm.
I've read like A Sister and Missing White Woman, so I'm like I need to get back into these Hollywood Homicide ones too.
They're great. They're really really fun, really good. And then I also wanted to mention. Can I mention one other one? Are we good?
Go for it.
Okay.
Yes.
This book is a thriller, and it's maybe too dark to be a gateway thriller in some ways because it is
Mm.
gory, but it's so unique. It's so much fun. I've been talking about it for a year, and I'll continue to talk about it. Patricia Wants to Cuddle by Samantha Allen. Do you know this book?
No.
Okay. Strap yourself in. So it is
Yeah.
about basically like a bachelor-esque TV show that is
Okay.
filming their final four, and they go to the Pacific Northwest, this like remote island, to go film it
Ooh.
as this kind of like final four, and we're camping, and it's really funny and has this kind of like light tone that's making fun of course, shows like The Bachelor, but they're not alone on this
Nice.
island. They're on this island with a Sasquatch, Patricia, of the title, along with like a lesbian death cult. And like it is truly bonkers
Campy.
and campy and fun and unique. Like I love a book where I can tell the writer was having fun the whole way. You know what I mean? Like, and this book,
Mm-hmm.
you're just like, this person had fun writing this every step of the way. And
Yes.
I mean, whether or not she did, I believe the author is a she, Samantha Allen. Whether or not she did, like, or identifies as a she, whatever. Whether or
Yes.
not she did, it
It
feels
says
that
she in
way.
her bio.
There we go. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Just and like it feels like that the whole way through. And
Yeah.
it's like it definitely has thriller elements, it definitely has action elements, it definitely has gory moments. Like if you were to visualize what like
Right.
but it's like the most fun I've had reading a book in years. And so like that one definitely has to go on my gateway thriller list.
Yes. I think that counts. Like
Yeah.
the cover it looks campy as well. Like I could tell from the cover, like the vibe of what
Totally.
it was going to be. And I think we've even talked about it. I'm a sucker for things that include reality
Yes.
TV, stuff like that. So now I have
You
never heard of this book and
Oh
it
my
sounds
gosh,
so
you've got to
good.
read it. It's so good. It's so funny.
Yes.
I might reread it this summer because it's just like such a perfect summer book, and it like does
Yeah.
such a good job of balancing being like hilarious and fun with also like deeply dark. But like
Right.
it's like it was I came out of it I'm still talking about it. I've been talking about it for a year. I loved this book.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, okay. Also, I'm looking at it on Goodreads right now. But for my girlies who like electronic versions or Kindle versions, it's only
Mhm.
$1.99 on Kindle too. So
So no excuse not
another
to go grab
win.
it. Yeah.
No excuse not to read it. And it's 250 pages, so it sounds like it's like one of those fast reads too.
Definitely. I think if it took me 2 days, I'd be shocked. You know what I mean? Especially because it's
Yeah.
so readable. Like you just get like sucked in. It's multiple POVs. So you're looking at POVs from one of the contestants, from one of the producers, and I think a couple of other people in there too. But it's just like,
Ooh.
yeah, like definitely
That
read
sounds
this
so
book.
good.
Yeah.
That's reminding me in some ways. So at the beginning, at the top of this episode, when you mentioned kind of stuff that's a little bit more like contemporary
Mm-hmm.
fiction, or I can't remember what you said that made me think of it. But The Real Deal by Caitlin Devlin, I've talked about multiple times, but I really, really liked that one too. And that one is like one where the like adult women who, well, in their 20s, early 20s, who used to be on like a Dance Moms esque reality TV show growing up, are like all gathered for a reunion.
Mm-hmm.
And all we know in the present timeline is that the show stopped abruptly for a certain reason, but we don't know what the reason was. And it's told back and forth as well. So you're in the present, then you go back to the past and alternate through it. But it's another one that it doesn't even have the thriller or mystery classification on
Mm-hmm.
Goodreads,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a mystery at the whole heart of it because you're trying to figure out what caused the show to
Mm-hmm.
end and why their relationships are so strained. And I actually talked to Caitlin about it too. She was on the podcast, but like she reads a lot of
Amazing.
thrillers, and
Mm-hmm.
so I think that she was like, that kind of was like in my mind to pace it that way. But that's one where like if you really just like don't even really want, like, there's no murder, there's nothing like that, but it's like a very fun one that still centers around reality TV. So that's my bonus, or my what did you honorable mention? That's my honorable
Honorable
mention.
mention. Yes. Great. That's a great one. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
totally. I
it's
feel like
so good.
once you start thinking about like the lens of like how often writers of most fiction just use mysteries to like pull you forward as a reader, like you see it everywhere. Like there's
Yeah.
always something you're reading to
Yeah.
try to understand or figure out, which is the same as reading a
Yeah.
thriller essentially.
Mhm. Yeah, it totally is.